Because here's the problem, Monty. I said it earlier, and I'll always be fair. Everyone who earns their place in a narrative gets to have the narrative explored. Are you ready? Get ready. Buckle in. Buckle in. Put the crossbow on. Like put the steering lock on. We actually now have to discuss the idea Zeka might win a second Worlds, bro. It's a real possibility. It's not implausible. This isn't what we all talked about in spring. This isn't Zeka. This isn't Viper 1v9. In fact, by the way, the whole team's actually looking like they're peaking right now. Everyone, even fucking Thorin looks better. Delight, by the way, looked awesome as well. Like, obviously, he never should have been let go from GenG, but we get it. The shot calling angle. Like, actually, low key, Hanwha Life, like I said, you actually have to sort of draft them. They probably are like the third most likely team to win Worlds now, right? Like, it's plausible. And by the way, this also means they probably should be in the semi-finals. Like, we have to sort of do a fucking. We have to recontextualize Hanwha Life now because they are a real team that could win Worlds. It can happen.
I mean, obviously, like it depends. It depends a lot on whether Peanut can actually hold his shit together within these circumstances. So, I am like skeptical about that to a certain degree. But I mean, I do think that some of the champions that we've seen them play are not really going to be hit by the patch notes that have been released. You know, especially things that they tend to be very good on, like Poppy or, you know, Maokai is worse, but I mean, it's still the problem with Maokai is his kit is just so good at the professional level that it's hard to imagine that he's really going to be pushed out by some like basically like sapling changes, because the saplings still function the same way and everything about his kit is still good, because the reason why he's broken at the professional level is he has a targeted CC, he has probably the best ult in the game of League of Legends, and he has unclearable fucking saplings that provide vision, right? And you know, it's extremely annoying to play against him. He also deals with things like enemy Ivern super well because you can toss those saplings in, and sure, there will be fewer saplings on the Rift, but there's still going to be a lot of them around, and he still provides the same functionality. So I think Maokai is still probably going to be pretty good. You know, and especially when you look at the Azir nerfs, like it not only actively helps, you know, players like Knight or Zeka who, you know, begrudgingly play the Azir, let's say, or, you know, Knight, it's always been the major flaw in his champion pool as a player. But I think like the Yone still going to have a very high priority. You know,
by the way, if you think about it's big for people like Cream from Top Esports, there's another guy that wants that in the fucking meta.
Sure. Corky is going to see a little bit of like high end damage nerf to his Q, but I imagine like Corky probably isn't going anywhere, right? So there are picks here that I think will still end up being quite good. Like Tristana should still be around, and if you actually look at these finals that happened, you know, I think one of the major flaws, what was so peculiar about these finals from GenG was like the lack of their own priority on Tristana. So if you guys rewind and you think about the last regular season match, which is the last match of the season that was played from GenG and Hanwha, was supposed to be the match where GenG is going to see if they could do the undefeated thing, but then they lost to KT and then it didn't matter at all. But in those games, Chovy played a couple games of Tristana, and Chovy has always been an extremely good Tristana player. And he completely cleaned up Hanwha Life in those games. And this got under Hanwha Life's skin so much that in the upper bracket finals of these playoffs, Hanwha was just straight banning the Tristana. They banned it every single game so that Chovy couldn't have it. And for whatever reason in these finals, guys, we just decided in the last two games that, you know, Chovy in game 5 is just going to B1 Corky and ban Tristana instead of just picking the Tristana.
Yeah, because why not pick it yourself?
Yeah, why not pick it yourself? I mean, even in the fourth game of this series, Peanut like B1's Maokai, and they have an opportunity to take the Tristana away, and they just curiously don't do it. And the thing about GenG is they are so good at playing side lane pressure, and the Tristana just amplifies that, right? And they had been playing throughout playoffs with Ziggs and doing much the same thing. Like, this is a team that is really good at lane assignments, that is really good at creating map pressure and taking, you know, side lane objectives and funneling gold into Chovy. So why are we prioritizing Corky here? It's not like Zeka isn't a good Corki player, but surely Tristana should be the pick for GenG. It's why it was banned against you in your last series against, even Hanwha thinks that. Like, your opponents don't want you to have Tristana, and you just don't pick it when it's available to you. You end up banning it instead. And by the time we're in game 5, we're in a situation where Chovy is into a full dive composition where he's playing Corki, and they have Vi, Yone, Ziggs, Jax. And it's like, if they want Chovy to die, Chovy is going to die in this composition. And they're just going to 100-0 him because the Vi goes in, and then Ziggs ults him, and then Yone ults him, and then maybe Jax just leap strikes in and stuns him. And like, that's it. How do you escape from this situation while still being able to put out damage? It forces Chovy into a weird build where he ends up going Zhonya's Hourglass very early in the game, which then hampers his damage, right? And Paze is Paze is just terrible in the final game of this series. Like, Paze, if we really want to point fingers as to which player played the worst on GenG, it was fucking Paze in this series. And Paze, if Chovy is being hard focused and dove, you have to step up. You have to be that guy. Are you the first team All-Pro? No, you got fucking dumpstered by Viper in this
is
series.
why, by the way, Wolf, Paze was never the MVP of GenG, because he was always existing in the back of the bus while watching Chovy drive it, bro. He wasn't the one like you saw here. Like you say, Monty, this is his perfect chance, by the way, where the story in the documentary, when you do the 5-peat, the story now goes, and of course, Chovy was sort of like countered by the draft, but that's when Paze stepped up and he carried us to the title. But you didn't. You just let the fucking Viper and Zeka win the title.
Look,
mate.
Paze was great for a lot of this summer, but if you want to be the best AD carry, you need to show up in this situation. When if you are just as good as other players on your team, if you are that guy, when the enemy team spends all of their resources to counter Chovy, you have to do something with that. They don't have anything left for you, Paze. You have to become that guy. He was terrible. He was just terrible in the last game of this series. One of his ults from, now, I don't think Kai'Sa was a good pick here. I did think he got kind of done dirty by the draft from GenG. You know, they take the Kai'Sa, and in the first time he ults, Viper just throws a minefield on him and he dies. And the second time he ults into the back of the dragon pit, and he just gets immediately CC'd by Zeka's Yone and destroyed like 100-0 because the light comes over the wall and crash downs, but he doesn't do any damage. Like, he doesn't do damage in these fights, and that's not acceptable, guys. And like, sure, is it GenG's fault for picking this janky ass like 3-tank composition where you know that Hanwha is going to immediately lock down one of your carries so that all of your damage is now just in one dude? Yeah, I mean, that's probably a mistake in terms of the draft. I don't like the K'Sante pick here. I wish they had picked Olaf. Like, if they had picked Olaf here and Keen had just run around in the back line and killed Viper, I think this is a very, very different style of game, right? I'm sure Keen can play that pick too. I mean, Keen can play anything. We know he's comfortable on some of these picks. Had they committed more to the dive, had they picked the Tristana, because part of the problem with game number 5 is that they were always playing on their back foot, and they needed them to engage into them, right? But they were also trying to...
also think they were a little bit hesitant too, like pulling the trigger, Monty. Like, there's times where like Keen or someone would go balls deep in or Canyon, and then they would just leave them to get bashed in. They wouldn't even go in on the fight, you know.
I mean, I just think it's a bad way to play the composition. If you know they're diving you, Canyon shouldn't be flanking in the fucking Baron pit. You know, trying to, he managed to like flank and then ult Zeka, but there was no follow-up damage because nobody could get close because Vi was there with ult.
He did play like shit in this final, didn't he? He semi-hinted it too, mate.
I mean, he wasn't good, and I think people were confused by the Skarner pick in spite of the fact that he's been playing Skarner basically the whole playoffs. And the thing about the Skarner pick is that it is kind of a unique GenG pick. Like, they play it more than any other team in the world. But if you think about how GenG has been playing this entire year, they at the start, we said Canyon was just a Sejuani and Maokai guy in spring. You know what I mean? It wasn't until summer that he started playing some of these more AP carry-oriented champions. But the bread and butter of this GenG team was Canyon playing engage tanks. And it worked for them because it opened up space for Keen and Chovy and Paze, and somebody had to be that guy. right? And so when Maokai and Sejuani are banned, as they were for a lot of this series, or Maokai was first picked, you know, Canyon can actually do work on the Skarner and fulfill much of that same role. Also, I think if he had played with the rest of his team and used Skarner ult when they were engaging into them and tried to kite, it might have been a different story, but they were using their comp in a really fucking weird way, you know, especially in that final game of the series, where it just seemed like they didn't really want to play this, and they could have played a full dive composition, but they end up getting stuck with this like Corki and Cassante, which is just weird. I mean, it's just weird. Like the Kaisa pickup, it has been common into Zeri, and it's been used into Ziggs, but you need other champions to kind of get back there with it. I mean, look, this wasn't as good of a finals as the spring finals between T1 and GenG. There were more flaws to these games, in my opinion. It was still a very good final in terms of excitement, but also, I mean, we have to question if Pays doesn't int on Ezreal 2 times and like E forward and get himself killed twice, you know, he literally E's forward to try and kill Peanut when they're pushing in top lane.
Yep.
And then Viper just wrecks him. Viper and Zeka just wreck him. I mean, he's literally Eing forward sometimes when he's blind. Like, he E's forward into a brush he has no vision in when Han was posturing in the mid game around the Baron pit. And then Viper and Zeka just jumps on top of him and it just 100-0s him. And it's like, why are you doing this? Why are we trying to play no vision blind flank Ezreal? Why are you using your E in this fashion? And he blows both of his sums and he still dies because Zeka also has flash to pursue and he gets hit by Viper's arrow. But at the end of the game, it's a very winnable game and Viper turns it around. So we get into the second game of this series, Thorin, and we're like, okay, so, you know, Hanwha decides we are going to play Azir Jhin with Ivern and not really be able to do anything. Doran is having like a stinker of a game. Like the lane swaps are pretty convincingly won by GenG over the course of this series. I mean, the next game too, Doran was playing Camille terribly, like terrible use of his E on Camille, constantly getting caught out, constantly dying, providing no value to this team composition. And it feels really bad to watch Hanwha. I mean, they got clapped in a couple of these games. And it didn't feel like they had a lot of opportunities to do much of anything. We got to see more spectacular, like Lehen's Blitzcrank games as well, where it's like, okay, he's going to come in and you're going to try and hide in Ivern brushes and he's just going to yoink people out of Ivern brushes, right? I don't know, man. Like, I was really unimpressed with Hanwha for like the first 3 of these games. I thought the first one was really just a couple of throws by Pays, and like this was really close to being that 3-0, like I said. But then it just goes back the other way. So we get into game 4, and it's like, I understand the theory behind taking the Udyr here, but are we really sure that the Udyr is like the best we can do? Because it really does depend on you creating pressure and proxying in the top side at the very start of the game. And when he starts to lose that lane, he can't do anything in team fights because he just gets outranged by Ezreal and like Tristana all day. He can never close that gap. He gets kited and destroyed in the 1v1 every time. Or he just gets pulled by Blitzcrank. I mean, I hate Misfortune and Alistar together, right? And GenG picks a composition in game number 4 that has no engage. Like, Alistar is a committal engage. It's not a non-committal engage. You must go in. And so if Alistar goes in, or even worse, if Alistar is standing in front and gets hit by a blitz hook and has to use his ult, they can't engage anymore, which means if you're GenG, you have to have priority. You have to be standing on every objective, force them to play into you. But instead, they just try and half-ass all these fights. You know, they're engaging with like Zyra ult and MF ult. It's just so fucking ugly. That's not how you play these champions. Like, if you look at the really good MF teams, like a lot of the LPL teams, they hold MF ult. They wait for you to engage. Then the bullet time comes out, right? But there's nothing they can do. By the way,
the use of Zyra ult was fucking ass in these games. Like you said, they were using it first instead of like as a guaranteed damage after. Like, it was mental, wasn't it? I know. It's so wild.
It's really bad when you're trying to use it for engage because you have to flash in or something like that. You know, Zyra is a champion that Zyra, MF, Udyr, these kind of champions you want them to play into you, but they never had objective priority because, again, they gave up the Tristana. The Tristana was bullying all their turrets, and they fucked up in the top side on a dive, got the Udyr behind, so they didn't have pressure there either. And then it's just like the game's fucking over, you know? And so, like, I don't know what GenG was doing in some of these drafts, or like, if your players don't know, if your players just want to force engages, then just give them the tools to engage. Don't give them nothing here. By the way, Lehens could have played Leona. They could have literally just played MF Leona in this game. Could have just done that. We could have just played MF Rel or MF Leona.
Well, that combo works in every region of League of Legends, whether you're skilled, whether you're no skilled. It's actually right now.
MF Leona's great.
It's, really
it's good, a great in lane, great engage, non-committal engage that you want, so you can go fishing for something. Then you can follow up with Zyra engage. Like if you hit a Leona ult, then you can hit the fucking Zyra root. Then Udyr runs in and stuns them. You know what I mean?
You bullet time across the top. You do everything.
It's fine. It's fine. But it just felt very, very weird. A lot of the decisions that we saw GenG making, and that game 4 was bad. I mean, it was just bad.
That's the downside of this final. It's like, here's where I'm going to actually melt the brains of all the idiot fans who can't understand probability, Monty. It's not that Hanwha actually showed they're better than GenG. They obviously aren't. Because notice how Hanwha could only win by a sliver when basically like many things went wrong for GenG. And notice how GenG, not even having a particularly good final, still almost won the final. The two options that were going to happen was, like I said on the last episode, this would either itself have been a boring 3-1, 3-0 for GenG. I agree with you, by the way. If they just win the first 2 games, it's just over 3-0. The third game, Hanwha probably even just breaks mentally and just chokes away and loses 3-0, or they had to win by the smallest margin ever. Like, believe it or not, watching this final doesn't make me think like a faker fan will say, like, choke V. He won't win Worlds. Like, GenG could still absolutely win Worlds, by the way. Like, it's totally plausible. Like, they're still really good guys. And remember, this isn't even going to be the better at Worlds, so the fuck do they care?
Also, like, are we saying that Chovy choked these finals too? Because he played pretty fucking well.
Yeah, he did
play pretty fucking well.
No, I told you, the one that actually convinced me was last Worlds. When I watched that BLG series, Monty, and at the end, the conclusion of fans was, Chovy solo lost this. It's like, what are we even doing anymore? Bro, he hard carried 2 of the games. Like, he wasn't even bad in that series. So same thing, I'm with you again. Like, aside from, you could argue like he should have picked a different champion in game 5. I'm with you on that. Aside from that, I think he played well in this finals, mate. He wasn't even bad at all.
Man,
like we were talking about earlier, bro, the games that GenG did win, they shit on them. Like, they had games they were just fucking smacking them as well. Like, that's the other thing. It wasn't like 5 epic close games, was it? They had a couple they were just wrecking them.
I mean, Hanwha won game 4 very convincingly, but I do think that was the GenG's worst draft. But yeah, I mean, I just don't get it. Like, to me, the biggest question mark over all of this is, why are we just giving them Tristana for free constantly? Why are we doing that? Like, Chovy's one of the best Tristana players in the world. Tristana is a champion that is so well suited to GenG's playstyle. And whenever they just gave the Tristana over, they never had an answer. Like, they gave the Tristan the Ziggs over, and they never had a pressure answer, right? They never had anybody in the side lanes who could outpush. It was just a massive problem. It's a massive, massive issue where they just lost total map control. Now,
also,
on the side,
remember, go on, keep going.
I was going to say, the side of Hanwha Life, you do have to praise the fact that Peanut, Zeka, and Viper had a fucking amazing final.
Oh, of course.
These guys were all great. Like, Thorin was pretty shit at times, but, you know, he came through on the Jax when he needed to. I mean, his Jax play has always been good, but I mean, that Camille game was just criminally bad from him, and the Renekton game wasn't so much better. But the real heroes of this was like Viper and Zeka saving game 1 and preventing the 3-0, and then them pulling off some really, really impressive heroics in the final couple of games. But I mean, there were games where it took Zeka and Viper being deathless in order to win this series.
See more cool, funny, interesting clips based on topics from my content? Well, subscribe to this channel then, or, you know, be a pleb and don't.